boy stole quietly into the castle, Kiki on his shoulder. He was too excited to feel frightened tonight. He went into the hall of the castle, and at once something struck him with surprise. There was a light coming from somewhere. Jack stared round him, puzzled. Then he saw where it came from. It came from the floor, or rather underneath the floor of the hall. The boy stepped forward cautiously. He came to a hole in the floor of the hall, and up from this hole came the light. Stone steps went down into whatever was below, cellar or dungeon, he didn't know. In a flash, Jack was down the stone steps, and then looked around him in the very greatest surprise. He seemed to be in a kind of museum. He was in a large underground room with tapestries on the stone walls and a thick covering on the floor. Round the room stood suits of armour, just as there often is in a museum. Old, heavy chairs stood here and there, and a long, narrow table with crockery and glass on it ran the length of the room. In the corner was a big old four-poster bed hung with heavy tapestries. Jack went over to it. It had obviously been slept in. There was a pitcher of ice-cold water on the table. Got from the pump, I suppose, thought Jack. At this moment he thought he heard a noise, and in sudden fright he darted up the stone steps to the top, taking Kiki with him. He hopped out just in time and went into one of the furnished rooms, the old drawing-room. But in going inside he fell over a stool and came to the ground. The footsteps outside stopped suddenly. The torchlight went out. Evidently the person was standing perfectly still and listening hard. With his heart beating fast, Jack slipped round the corner of an old couch and knelt there with Kiki on his shoulder. The boy heard a cautious footstep coming into the room. Then there was silence again. Then another footstep sounded, a little nearer. Jack's hair began to prickle on his scalp and stand up straight. If the man came round the couch and switched on his torch, he would be bound to see Jack. The boy's heart pounded away, and his forehead felt suddenly wet. Kiki clung to his shoulder, feeling the fright of her master. She couldn't bear it any longer. She suddenly rose into the air and flew at the head of the unseen man, giving one of the yelping screams she'd picked up from the eagles. He uttered a startled exclamation and tried to beat off the bird. His torch clattered to the floor. Kiki screeched again, this time like an express train, and the man lashed out at her. Kiki found Jack once more and perched on the crouching boy, growling like a dog.
"Good heavens, this place is full of birds and dogs,"
said someone in a disgusted voice. The man felt over the floor for his torch and at last found it.
"Ha! Broken,"
he said, and Jack heard the click as he tried to switch it on.
"One of those eagles, I suppose. What does it want to come indoors for?"
Muttering, the man went out. Jack heard a curious grating sound, and then there was complete silence. At last he got cautiously up and tiptoed to the door. He peeped out. There was now no light to be seen shining up dimly from underground. All was darkness and silence. Without trying to see what had happened to the curious opening, he ran into the courtyard and made his way back to the old gorse bush. He felt safe there. After an hour or two of thinking and wondering, Jack at last fell asleep again. He awoke to find little fingers of sunlight coming through the gorse bush, and was glad that day had come. He crawled out of the bush and breakfasted on biscuits and plums. Suddenly he went stiff and looked in amazement at two men walking through the courtyard. They were going towards the castle. How in the world had they got in? There simply must be some way in, or had the men keys to one of the big gates or doors? The men went into the castle. Evidently, unlike the hidden man, they did not fear being seen in daylight. "Will the hidden man tell them he thought there was someone about last night?" thought Jack in a panic. "Will they come and look for me?" Jack crawled hurriedly back into the bush again, not waiting to wrap himself up in the rug and getting terribly scratched. When he was inside, he remembered that he'd left some paper bags in the courtyard below with some apple cores in them. "Dash," he thought. "If those are found, they'll know there's someone here besides themselves." He waited in the bush for an hour or so, taking peeps at the eagle's nest now and again. Then he heard the sound of voices and peeped between the prickly branches to see who it was. It was the two men again. They were great, hulking men, one of them with a black beard. As they came near, he tried to hear what they said, but they were not talking any language he knew. Suddenly, they stopped, and with an exclamation the bearded man picked up Jack's paper bags. He saw the apple cores inside and showed the other man. The cores were still moist. The men then separated and began to make a thorough search of the castle, the towers, the walls, and the courtyard. Jack watched them through a chink in the bush. Kiki was absolutely quiet. Then the men came across to the crag where the eagles nested. It was plain they were going to climb up to explore that place too, in case anyone was hiding there. Jack crouched as still as a mouse when an owl is near. The men came right up the crag, and gave a cry of amazement when they saw the eagle's nest with the young one in. Evidently they didn't know the ways of eagles, for they went quite near to the nest, and one of the men put out his hand. There was a whir of mighty wings, and the female eagle seemed to drop like a stone from the sky onto the man's head. He turned away, while the other man beat off the angry bird. Jack had a marvellous view of the first man the eagle had attacked. He was still looking up, showing the whole of his face and his neck in an open-collared shirt. Jack pressed his camera release. Click! Both men heard the click of the camera and looked puzzled. Then, as the female eagle came at them again, they hurriedly descended the crag and ran down into the courtyard. Jack waited in the bush, watching the eagles, who had been much upset by the visit of the two men. Soon it was plain to Jack that they meant to take the young bird away from the nest. It must learn to fly. The boy forgot his fears in his interest at the efforts of the two eagles to make the young one fly. They persuaded it to the edge of the nest, and then, with a push, dislodged it onto the ledge on which the nest was built. The young bird tried to get back again, but the female eagle flew round and round it, yelping, trying to tell it that it must go with her. The young one listened, or seemed to listen, then turned its head away, bored. Then, for no reason that Jack could see, it suddenly spread out its wings. They were enormous. The boy had been taking snap after snap, and now he took a splendid picture of the young eagle trying out his wings. The youngster flapped his wings so hard that he danced about on tiptoe, and then, most superbly, he took off from the ledge and rose into the air with his parents screaming on either side of him. He could fly! "Marvellous!" said Jack, and cautiously took the roll of film from his camera. As he slipped a new roll of film into his camera, he heard the voices of the other children. He was very glad, but where were the men? He crept out from the bush and climbed down to join them. They saw by his face that he had news for them. Lucy Ann ran to him. "Has anything happened, Jack? You look very serious. Look, what do you think? We've come up with piles of things because Mrs. Mannering says we can stay for 2 or 3 days. She's got to go to Dinah's Aunt Polly, who's been taken ill again, but she'll be back soon. And she thought that we might as well join you up here if we wanted to," said Dinah. "But you don't look very thrilled about it, Jack." "Well, listen," said Jack. "There's something odd here, really odd. I don't know if you ought to come. In fact, as I've really taken all the snaps I need to take of the eagles, I honestly think it would be better if we all went home." "Go back to Spring Cottage?" said Phillip in surprise. "But why? Quick, tell us everything, Jack." "All right. But first, where's Tassie?" said Jack, looking round for the little gypsy girl. "Her mother wouldn't let her come," said Lucy Ann. "I think Tassie's got an awful mother," said Phillip. "Anyway, she can't come, but go on, tell your story." "Well, I suppose you didn't by any chance meet anyone coming down the hill, did you?" said Jack suddenly, thinking that perhaps the two men had gone. "We saw what looked like 3 men in the distance," said Phillip. "Why?" "3 men?" said Jack thoughtfully. "That looks as if the hidden man went too, then." "What are you talking about?" cried Dinah impatiently. Jack began his story. The others listened in astonishment. Finally Jack said, "I think we ought to go back to Spring Cottage. We've dealt with dangerous men before, and it wasn't pleasant. We'd better all go back." "Right," said Phillip. "I agree with you. But seeing that you think all 3 men are out of the way, what about having a squint at that hidden room?" "All right," said Jack. They all went into the vast hall, and the boys switched on their torches. Jack led them to the back of the hall and looked at the floor. There was no hole to be seen at all. It had gone completely. The children looked about for a trapdoor in the floor, but there was none. Phillip began to wonder if Jack had dreamt it all. Then his sharp eyes saw a spike made of iron set deeply in the wall at the back of the hall. Phillip took hold of it. "Here's something strange," he began, and pulled hard. The spike moved smoothly in some sort of groove, and suddenly there was a grating noise at Lucy Ann's feet. She leapt back with a startled cry. The ground was opening at her feet. A big stone there was disappearing downwards in some mysterious fashion, exposing a short flight of stone steps, leading down into the hidden room that Jack had seen the night before. The children gasped. Phillip, Lucy Ann and Dinah went eagerly down the steps to examine everything. They saw the tapestries on the walls, they saw the old suits of armour standing round the room, and the big, heavy chairs that looked as if they were made for giants, not men. "Where's Jack?" said Phillip. "Gone to get Kiki," said Dinah. "Oh, look, Phillip, here's another spike in the wall, just like the one upstairs. What happens when you pull it?" She pulled it, and with a grating noise the stone swung up and into place, imprisoning the 3 children down below. They watched the great stone slide into place like magic, but Phillip suddenly felt worried. "Dinah, let me have that spike. I hope to goodness it'll move the stone back again." The boy pulled at it, but it remained fixed. He jerked it. It would not move at all. "It closes the hole in the floor, but it doesn't open it," he said. "Jack'll be along soon," said Dinah, "and he'll work the spike upstairs in the hall to open it again. We needn't worry." "I suppose he will," said Phillip. "You are an idiot, Dinah, messing about with things before you know what they do." "Well, you'd have done the same thing yourself." All right," said Phillip. An idea came to him. "I say, I'll play a trick on Jack," he said. "I'll get inside one of these suits of armour and hide. Then, when Jack opens the hole and comes down, I'll suddenly step off one of these pedestals the armour is on with a frightful clanging noise and scare him stiff." The girls laughed. "All right," said Lucy Ann. "Hurry up." Before long, Phillip was in the suit of armour. He had the helmet on his head and the visor over his face. He could see quite well through the visor, but nobody would know there was anyone inside the armoured suit. He got back on the pedestal with a lot of clanking. The girls giggled. "Won't Jack get an awful shock? I wish he'd come," said Lucy Ann. "Are you comfortable, Phillip?" asked Dinah.
"Well, fairly. Golly, I wouldn't much like to go to war in this. I'd never be able to walk more than a few yards."
The girls wandered round the room. They looked at the tapestry scenes, they sat in the enormous old chairs, they fingered the ancient weapons that were arranged here and there. "What is Jack doing?" said Lucy Ann at last, beginning to feel anxious. "He's been simply ages. Oh, Dinah, you don't think those men have come back, do you, and captured him?" "I shouldn't think so," said Dinah, who was also beginning to feel rather worried.
You know, I don't believe those men we saw were the men from the castle. I'm pretty certain they were men belonging to the farm. One was that enormously tall fellow we sometimes see when we fetch eggs."
"I believe you're right, Phillip," said Lucy Ann, scared. "I do wonder what Jack is doing," said Dinah. "I do wish he'd come." Jack was certainly a long time coming, but he couldn't help it. He had gone after Kiki, who had flown into the furnished room in which they'd both hidden the night before, and suddenly, from the window, he had seen the 3 men in a corner of the yard. The boy darted back into the hall and went to the place where the hole should be, but it was gone, and a stone now covered the entrance to the room. Should he open the hole and see if the others were down there? Would the men come into the hall just as he was doing it? He could hear their voices quite clearly now. Jack darted back into the furnished room and hid behind a long tapestry curtain. 2 of the men now separated and went off into the castle. evidently to make another good search. The third man stood at the great doorway, puffing at a cigarette and apparently keeping a watch over the courtyard. It was impossible for Jack to open the way to the hidden room, for the man at the doorway would see and hear him. The man finished his cigarette. He turned and came into the hall. Jack heard his feet echoing and held his breath. Was he going back to the hidden room? He was. He walked to the back of the hall and felt about in the wall there for the spike. Jack crept to the door of the room he was hiding in and peered through the crack. The man pulled at the spike, and the stone moved with a grating sound. Dinah and Lucy-Anne heard the grating noise of the stone as it moved and looked up. Phillip peered through his visor, hoping Jack was coming at last, but to their horror a man stood on the steps, looking at them in the greatest astonishment and anger. The two girls stared at him and trembled. He had an enormous nose, narrow eyes, and the thinnest lips imaginable. Shaggy eyebrows hung over his eyes, almost like a sheepdog's hair.
"So," said the man, "so you come here and you go to my room. What is the meaning of this?"
The girls were terrified, and Lucy-Anne began to sob. Jack, listening, longed to push the man down the steps and break his neck. Then he heard the footsteps of the other two men returning from their hunt. The first man heard them too, and went back up the stairs to the top. He called to the others in a language Jack didn't understand, evidently telling them to come and see what he'd found. Phillip, still hidden in the suit of armour, took the opportunity of whispering instructions to the girls.
"Don't be frightened. They'll probably only think you're two girls visiting the old castle. You tell them that. Don't say a word about me or Jack."
He couldn't say any more because all three men now came down the steps and into the hidden room. One man had a dense black beard, the other was clean-shaven, but the man the girls had already seen was the ugliest of a really ugly trio. Lucy-Anne began to cry again. Dinah was very scared, but she would not cry.
"What are you here for?"
asked the shaggy-browed man.
"Now, you tell us everything, or you may be very, very sorry."
"We only came to have a look at the castle," said Dinah, trying to keep her voice from trembling. "Does it belong to you? We didn't know."
"How did you find this room?"
demanded the bearded man, scowling. "By accident," said Dinah. "We were so surprised."
"Does anyone outside this castle know we are here, or anything about this room?" asked the shaggy man.
"No, nobody," said Dinah, truthfully.
"Is anyone with you?"
asked the bearded man suspiciously. "Well, you can see that for yourselves," said Dinah. "Please let us go. We won't come here again, we promise."
"No, little missus, you must stay here till our work is done. Then, when it no longer matters, maybe we shall let you go. I said maybe. It depends on how you behave."
To the girls' intense relief, the men allowed them to go up the stone steps into the hall. Then the hole closed once more, and they were left alone. "We must escape," whispered Dinah, taking Lucy-Anne's hand. "We must get away immediately and bring help to Phillip. I daren't think what would happen to him if those men found him." "Where's Jack?" sobbed Lucy-Anne. "I want him." Jack was not far away. As soon as he heard the stone close the hole up and recognized the girls' voices, he darted out of the old drawing-room. Lucy-Anne saw him and ran to him gladly. He put his arms round her and patted her. "It's all right, Lucy-Anne, it's all right. We'll soon be out of here, and we'll get help to rescue Phillip. Don't worry, don't cry any more." The boy guided her to the wide stone stairs that led to the upper rooms of the castle. "We'll get across the plank in no time," he said. "Then we'll be safe. We'll soon rescue Phillip, too. Don't be afraid." Up they went, and up, then along the long corridor, lit dimly by its slit windows. They came to the room they used for the plank. Dinah ran gladly to the window, eager to slip across to safety, but she paused in dismay. There was no plank. "I'm afraid," said Jack, "I'm very much afraid that the men discovered how we got in and removed the plank." "Oh, dear," said Dinah, and sat down suddenly on the dusty floor. "My legs won't hold me up any more. I suppose the men would never have let Lucy-Anne and me out of the hidden room unless they discovered our way in and made it impossible for us to escape that way. Do stop sniffing, Lucy-Anne. It doesn't do any good." "Don't bother her," said Jack, who felt sorry for his small sister. "You girls go down to the hall and see if that room is still shut. If it is, I'll slip down and go up the crag to my gorse bush. You can sit about the rocks there and whisper to me what goes on." "I wish we knew where Blyton got in and out," said Lucy Ann. "If we did, we might try his way. Only I suppose if it's a rabbit hole, it will be far too narrow for us." They made their way to the hall. The stone was still in place over the hidden room. They beckoned Jack down, and he sped across the hall, out of the great doorway, across the courtyard, and up the craggy, gorse-grown rock in the corner to the safety of his hiding place. He crawled in, and the bush closed around him. The girls climbed up the rocks to be near him. They undid a packet of food and began to have a meal, though Lucy Ann choked over almost every mouthful. They handed Jack some food through the prickly branches of the bush. "Shh! Here are two of the men," said Dinah. "Don't say a word more, Jack." The men gave a loud shout for the two girls. Dinah answered sulkily. They beckoned to them to come down from the crag.
"And did you find your little plank?" inquired the bearded man politely,
and the other man sniggered. "No, you took it away," said Dinah sullenly.
"Of course, it was such a good idea of yours, but we didn't like it," said the man. "Now you cannot get away, you know that, so you may stay here unharmed in the courtyard, and at night you may sleep peacefully in the big bed downstairs, for we have work to do that will take us elsewhere. But we forbid you to go up to the towers or upstairs at all. We are not going to have you signaling for help. You understand that if you disobey us, you will be very sorry, and you will probably be put down into a dungeon we know of, where rats and mice and beetles live."
Dinah shuddered. The men walked off and disappeared once more into the castle. "What's happening to Phillip?" said Lucy Ann after a pause. "Will he starve down there? I wish we could rescue him." "He won't starve. There's plenty of food on the table, if only he can step off his pedestal and get it," said Dinah. "If only we could send word to Tassie, she might get help. But there's no way of sending word." The sun sank lower. Long shadows lay across the courtyard, and then the whole of it went into twilight. The men came up the yard, two of them together. They called the girls.
"Hey, you two girls, you better come down and go to bed."
"We don't mind the dark, we'll stay a bit longer," shouted back Dinah.
"Well, come down in half an hour,"
shouted the bearded man.
"It will be quite dark then, and you'd be better inside."
They disappeared. Dinah slipped down from her perch and went silently after them. She saw them going down the steps of the hidden room. Then she heard the now familiar grating noise as the entrance hole was closed by the sliding stone. She ran back to Jack. "Come on, Jack," she whispered. "The men are down in the hidden room. You'll be safe if you come out." Very glad to come from his uncomfortable hiding place, Jack squeezed out of the bush. "Golly, I'm stiff," he said. "Come on, let's go for a nice sharp walk round the courtyard." They set off, linking their arms together. They hadn't gone more than halfway before something hurled itself against them out of the shadows and almost knocked Jack over. He stopped, startled. "It's Blyton! Dear little old Blyton! How did you get here? Oh, I am glad to see you." Blyton made happy noises in his throat, rolled over like a puppy, licked the girls and Jack, and generally behaved as if he was mad with delight. But he kept going off to the side and back again, and it was soon clear to the others that he had come to find Phillip, his master. "You can't get to Phillip, old boy," said Jack, fondling the little fox cub. "You'll have to make do with us. Phillip isn't here." "Jack, I've got an idea," said Lucy Ann, suddenly clutching her brother's arm. "What?" said Jack, who never thought very much of Lucy Ann's good ideas. "Can't we use Blyton as a messenger? Can't we send him back to Tassie with a note telling her to get help for us? Blyton's sure to go back to her when he can't find Phillip, because next to Phillip he loves Tassie. Can't we do that?" Jack considered it. "Well," he said, "I must say it seems worth trying. All right, we'll make Blyton our messenger." The next thing was to write a note to Tassie. Jack had a notebook, and he tore out a page. He wrote a few words in pencil and read them out to the others. "Tassie, we are imprisoned here. Get help as soon as you can. We may be in serious danger." They all signed it. Then Jack folded it up and wondered how to get Blyton to take it. He thought of a way at last. He had some string in his pocket, and first of all he tied the note tightly round and round with it. Then he twisted the string fairly tightly round Blyton's sturdy little neck. "There," said Jack, pleased. "I don't think Blyton can get that off." "Go back to Tassie, Blyton," said Lucy Ann. But Blyton didn't understand. He still hoped Phillip would appear, and he didn't want to go back until he'd seen him, or better still, he would stay with him if he could. So the little fox cub hunted all around for Phillip again and again, occasionally stopping and trying to get off this new thing round his neck, but he couldn't. Suddenly one of the men called loudly, making everyone jump violently.
"Come in, you two girls."
"Good night, Jack. We must go," whispered Lucy Ann, giving her brother a hug. "Good night. Don't worry about anything. Once Blyton gets to Tassie, she'll soon bring help." The girls left him in the dark courtyard. They went into the hall and saw the dim light of the lamp shining up from the hidden room. They went down the stone steps and looked hurriedly round. Was Phillip still in the suit of armour? They couldn't tell. All the suits of armour were standing around as usual, but whether one had Phillip inside or not, they didn't know.
"We are going to shut you in here," said the shaggy man. "You can use that bed to sleep in. We shall see you in the morning."
He went up the steps, and then the stone swung sideways and upwards, closing the hole completely. The girls were prisoners once again. They stood in silence for a moment or two, listening. "Phillip," whispered Lucy Ann, looking at the suit of armour in which she'd last seen him. "Are you there? Speak to us."
"I'm still here,"
came Phillip's voice, sounding queerly hollow.
"but I hope I never have to spend another day like this. I'm going to get out of this armour. I've got cramp in all my limbs. I'm tired out with standing so still, and I've had to stop myself sneezing at least 3 times. It's been a most awful strain, I can tell you."
A clanking noise came from the suit of armour as Phillip began to get out of it, clumsily and awkwardly, for he felt very stiff. "Oh, poor old Phillip," said Lucy Ann, going to help. "You must have had an awful day." "I have, but I wouldn't really have missed it for worlds," said Phillip. "My word, I've learnt a few things, I can tell you." "We'd better get on the bed in case those awful men come back," said Dinah. "What will you do if they do, Phillip?" "I shall hear the grating noise the stone makes when it moves, and I'll hop out of bed and get underneath it," said Phillip. There was plenty of room for them all on the enormous old bed. There was an eider-down mattress, which the 3 children sank into. Phillip was pleased. After the hardness of the suit of armour, it was pleasant to feel something so soft. He sat up and told his story. "Well, you remember when you went up the steps by yourselves and left me there," he said. "I was awfully angry to think those men should talk to you like that, but I couldn't do anything about it, of course. Anyway, I just stayed put for ages, and after some time all 3 men came down, shut up the entrance hole, and sat around the table." "Could you understand their talk?" asked Lucy Ann. "No, more's the pity, I couldn't," said Phillip. "They had maps out and were tracing things on them, but I couldn't see what. I almost overbalanced myself trying to see. Gracious, what a shock it would have given those men if you had toppled over with a crash," said Dinah with a laugh. "Good thing you didn't, though." "You see the tapestry over there, the one with the dogs and the horses on it?" said Phillip, pointing. "Exactly opposite where my suit of armour stands. Well, behind there is a secret door." He paused, and the girls gazed first at the tapestry and then at Phillip. "Shall we see where that door leads to?" said Dinah, overcome with curiosity. "No, don't let's," said Lucy Ann, who'd had enough excitement for one day. "You're scared," said Dinah scornfully. "No, she's not," said Phillip. "Anyway, I think it would be a mistake to mess about behind that tapestry just now. If the men happened to come back and saw that we'd found their secret door, goodness knows what they'd do. We might never be heard of again." Dinah began to tell Phillip about their day with Jack in the courtyard, and all that had happened. He was very glad that Jack hadn't been caught. "Well, that's 2 people those men have no idea are here," he said. "Me and Jack. That's good. As long as they think it's only a couple of girls they've got to deal with, they won't be so much on their guard." Then Dinah told him about sending Blyton with a message to Tassie. He listened thoughtfully, and then made a remark that sent their hearts down into their boots. "It was a fine idea," he said, "but it won't do a bit of good, I'm afraid. You've forgotten that Tassie can't read or write." Jack felt lonely when the girls had gone down the steps to the hidden room for the night. He was left up in the courtyard with Kiki, and he felt bored. Then suddenly he saw the 3 men standing in the moonlight, and felt glad that he had not been wandering about, for he would certainly have been seen. He slipped away into the shadows of the great wall, and came near to the enormous door that stood facing what had once been the road to the castle. He sat down by a big bush, knowing it would hide him completely. Suddenly he jumped violently, and stared as if he could not believe his eyes. The big door was opening. It swung slowly back without a sound. 2 men entered the castle yard, and then the great solid door closed silently behind them. There was a loud click, and then the 2 men passed quite close to Jack and joined the other 3. Then they all disappeared into the castle. Jack imagined they were going down to the hidden room, as indeed they were. He waited till they'd gone, and then made his way as quickly as he could to the big door in the high wall. If only he could open it! If only he could get out, and go down the hillside, even if he had to walk over the treacherous landslide. He felt about for the handle of the door. It was a large iron ring. Jack twisted it this way and that, but the door didn't open. He sat and brooded near the door. "I'll wait here in the shadows till they come back, and then I'll dash out with them. They'll be so taken by surprise that maybe they won't even put out a hand to me." So Jack sat there, hour after hour, almost falling asleep. But the men did not return. When the eastern sky began to turn silver, Jack knew it was time to return to his gorse bush. The girls came out of the hidden room at about 8 o'clock. The 3 men had gone down there and turned them out. Dinah begged Phillip to get back into the suit of armour before the men returned, but he wouldn't. "No, I'd rather be under the bed," he said firmly. "One day in that horrible stiff suit is enough for me. I'd rather be caught than stand there all day again. You put me some food and drink under the bed, and I'll stay here. I can always wander about and stretch my legs when the men aren't here." Apparently it was the men's intention to sleep the day away on the big 4-poster. They came down into the room and ordered the girls out. "We'll call you down tonight," said the bearded man from the bed, and he yawned. "Take what food you want from that pile of tins. There's a tin opener on the table. Now clear out and leave us. Couple of little nuisances." The girls grabbed a tin of sardines, a tin of salmon, one of peaches, and one of apricots, and fled up the stairs. "Sleep well," said Dinah mockingly. And then the 2 girls went in search of Jack. He was under his gorse bush, wishing they would come. "Jack, you all right? You can come out for a bit because the men are safe down in the underground room," said Lucy Ann. "Do you want some sardines or peaches? We got both." "Hello," said Jack, delighted to see them. "I'm longing for something to eat. Didn't you bring some biscuits with you when you came yesterday?" Dinah found the tin of biscuits, and they had a comic breakfast of sardines, biscuits, and peaches, washed down by ginger beer. Still, they all enjoyed it thoroughly, and exchanged their news eagerly. Jack was intensely interested to hear all that Phillip had told them. "A secret way behind that tapestry," he exclaimed, his eyes gleaming. "But where does it lead to?" "Goodness knows. Into the hillside somewhere, I suppose," said Dinah, dipping a biscuit into peach juice and sucking it. The day passed slowly. There was nothing to do, not even an eagle to watch. "Wish I could do a spot of developing," sighed Jack, feeling in his shorts pocket for his precious rolls of film. "But I can't. I'm just longing to see how the eagles have come out." The day passed at last, and night came. The men yelled for the 2 girls to go down into the secret room again. They said a hurried good-night to Jack and went. Jack did not hide in his gorse bush. When it was dark enough, he went down to the spring near the bottom of the wall to get a drink. He bent down to the spring and then listened in amazement. A most curious noise was coming from the little tunnel into which it disappeared. A scraping, dragging noise could be heard too. Something was coming up the tunnel. Jack stepped back in great alarm. Then he heard the unmistakable sound of Blyton yelping, and he knew that part of the noise must be made by the fox cub. He bent over the tunnel and flashed his torch on to see down the narrow mouth. He saw a white face staring up at him. It was Tassie's. She was lying still for the moment, but began to wriggle again when the light flashed on her. "Tassie, what are you doing? Tassie!" said Jack, in a low but most astonished voice. Tassie didn't answer. She squeezed herself up a bit more until her head and shoulders were outside the tunnel. Then Jack gave her a pull, and she came out at once. Blyton followed, looking very forlorn. Tassie had him on a lead, and he couldn't get away. Tassie sat down and gasped painfully. She put her head over her knees, which were drawn up, and seemed quite unable to speak a word. Jack flashed his torch over her. She was soaking wet and unspeakably dirty. Mud streaked her face and arms and legs. She was shivering with cold and fright. Jack made her get up and go with him to the crag. He put her behind a rock and fetched the rugs. He made her strip off the soaked dress she wore and cover herself from head to foot with a couple of rugs. Then the boy sat close to her to warm her. Kiki perched on her shoulder and pressed against her cold cheek. Soon Tassie's breath grew more even, and she turned to look at Jack, trying to summon up a faint smile. "Where's Phillip?" she whispered at last. "With the girls," said Jack, not wanting to tell her everything at once. "Don't worry for a minute or two. Get your breath back. You're exhausted." Eventually she managed to explain to Jack that Blyton had brought the note, but she couldn't read it. So she had the idea of putting a dog lead on Blyton and trailing round with him. She thought he might try to find Phillip again. It worked. He led her up a sort of tunnel that the spring flows through. It was very narrow. She nearly got stuck. "Could you wriggle down the tunnel with me and we'll fetch help?" said Tassie. "That's just what I thought of doing," said Jack. "I think I'd better go tonight, Tassie, and not wait to take the two girls. You'd better stay here and tell the girls what has happened. You can hide in my old gorse bush till they come tomorrow morning." Tassie sighed with relief. She didn't in the least want to go back down that terrible way again. She would dream about it all her life long. Neither did she really want to stay in the courtyard alone for the night, but Jack said he would leave both Kiki and Blyton with her, and they could sleep in the gorse bush all together. Jack crawled head first into the cold water. He wriggled into the tunnel. It smelt damp and nasty. He dragged his body down using hands and elbows to lever himself along. It wasn't at all pleasant. When he got down some way, the rather earthy tunnel gave way to hard rock. Jack thought he must be under the wall by now. The tunnel widened out considerably, and the boy sat on a ledge to rest. He began to shiver with the cold, for he was now soaked through. He went on again. It was quite dark, and he could only feel his way along. It seemed hours before he reached the outlet, but at last he was there. He dragged himself out and sat panting on a patch of soft heather. He hoped that never in his life again would he have to crawl through a tunnel like that. He set off down the hill, looking eagerly for a sight of Spring Cottage. Yes, there it was, black, with the moonlight behind it, its roof silvered and shining. And then suddenly Jack stopped. He had seen something that struck him as odd. "There's smoke. Smoke coming from the chimney," he said to himself. And he leaned against a tree. "What does that mean? Can Aunt Allie be back? Well, no, Tassie would have known." He crept near to the cottage. There was a light shining out of one of the windows. Jack tiptoed to the window, anxious and puzzled. He looked cautiously in. Someone was sitting in a tall-backed armchair that had its back to Jack. Was it Mrs. Mannering? A cloud of smoke suddenly came from the chair. Thick, blue pipe smoke. "It's a man," whispered Jack to himself. "Whoever can it be?" He made up his mind to creep into the house and peep through the crack in the kitchen door. He stole round to the other side of the house where his bedroom window was. If it was open, Jack knew he could climb the tree nearby and slip inside. It was open, just a crack. He went to the tree and climbed it quickly. He slipped his hand inside the crack of the window and jiggled the catch. It dropped, and the window swung open. Jack cautiously climbed inside and stood there, hardly daring to breathe. He made his way to the rather creaky, winding stairs. Then he began to go down, one step at a time, hoping to goodness they wouldn't creak too loudly. There was a bend in one place, and Jack meant to stand there quietly before he went on. But no sooner had he got there than someone leapt on him, caught his arms, and jerked him violently down the last 4 stairs. He fell, and all the breath was bumped out of his body. Whoever had jumped on him stood up and then pulled him roughly to his feet. Then he was propelled swiftly into the lighted kitchen. Jack turned to face his captor, fully expecting to see one of the men from the tower. The two stared at one another in the very greatest surprise, and stepped backwards in amazement. "Bill Smuggs!"
"Jack! What on earth are you doing creeping in like this? I thought you must be a burglar."
"Golly, you bruised me properly," said Jack, rubbing himself. He began to shiver violently again. Bill looked at his soaking clothes and pale face and pulled him to the fire, on which a kettle was boiling merrily.
"What have you been up to? You're dripping wet. You'll get a frightful chill. Look, where are the others? When I arrived today to ask Mrs. Mannering if she could put me up for a night or two, the house was shut. There was no one here."
"Well, how did you get in, then?" asked Jack, enjoying the warmth of the fire.
"Oh, I have my ways," said Bill. "I thought you must have all gone picnicking, so I waited and waited for you to come back, but you didn't. So I decided to spend the night here by myself and make inquiries somewhere tomorrow to see what had happened to you all. And then I heard mysterious sounds, decided it was a burglar, and caught you."
Bill made a jug of hot cocoa and milk, found some biscuits, and gave them to Jack, who was now feeling a lot warmer. He'd stripped off his wet things and was sitting in a dressing-gown. "I don't feel I ought to waste time like this, really," he said, "as the others are in danger, but I'll have to tell you the whole story and then leave it to you what to do."
"Go ahead,"
said Bill. So Jack began, and Bill listened with the greatest interest.
"This is an extraordinary tale, Jack," he said at last. "There's a lot more in this than you know. What were those men like? Describe them. Was there a man there with a scar right across his chin and neck?"
No," said Jack, thinking. "Not one of them, as far as I know. I took a jolly good snap of one man, though, when they were at the Eagle's Nest."
"Have you got those snaps?" said Bill eagerly.
"I got the films," said Jack, and he pointed to the tightly rolled-up sou'wester on the table. "They're in there. They're not developed yet, Bill."
"Well, whilst you have a good sleep, I'll develop them," said Bill. "I see you've got a little dark room fixed up for yourself off the hall there."
"Yes, but oughtn't we to go right back and rescue the girls?" asked Jack.
"Well, I shall have to collect a few men and arrange a few things. If these men are doing what I think they are, then we stand a good chance of roping them all in together. I don't think they'll harm the girls at all."
"What are the men doing?" asked Jack curiously. "Are they anything to do with the job you said you were on, Bill?"
"Can't tell you yet," said Bill. "I hardly think so, but I shall soon know."
He put Jack on the sofa, arranged rugs over him, turned down the lamp, and went off into the little dark room with the films. Jack slept peacefully, for he was tired out. How long he slept he didn't know, but he was awakened by Bill coming into the room in the greatest excitement, holding a film.
"Sorry to wake you, Jack, but this is a marvellous thing," he said.
And he held the film up to the daylight, which was now coming in at the window.
"You have snapped this man perfectly. Every detail is as clear as could be. He's the man with the beard."
"Who is he?" asked Jack curiously.
His real name, is Mannheim," said Bill, "but he's known as Scarneck. He is a very dangerous spy."
"Golly," said Jack, staring. "Were you after him?"
"Well, I was detailed to keep an eye on him and watch his movements," said Bill. "I wasn't to capture him because we wanted to know what he was up to this time and who his friends were. Then we hoped to rope in the whole lot. But Scarneck is a very clever fellow with an absolute gift for disappearing. I traced him to the town where you met me, and then I lost him completely. Now I'm off in the car to the town to do a little reporting on the telephone there and to collect a few friends. You go to sleep again. You'll be able to go up to the castle with me when I come back and show me the way."
Jack slept peacefully again for some hours. He didn't wake until Bill returned in the car. With him were 4 friends. Jack thought they looked pretty tough. It was plain that Bill was in authority over them. Bill came into the kitchen, leaving the men outside.
"Hello," he said. "Awake at last? It's gone 1 o'clock.
Are we going up to the castle soon?" said Jack, gathering the dressing gown round him and preparing to go upstairs to his bedroom.
"No, not till tonight," said Bill. "We plan to go just before midnight. I've no doubt one or other of those men keep a lookout during the daytime."
"Oh, the girls will be awfully tired of waiting for us all day long," said Jack.
"Can't very well help it," said Bill. "It is most important that we get in without being seen."
Jack went up and dressed. It was terribly hot, though the sun was behind sulky-looking clouds. He felt out of breath, though he'd done nothing at all. "Feels like a storm," he thought. "I hope it won't come today. It might frighten the girls, up there, all alone." Just as it got dark, they all piled into Bill's big car and set off up the hill. The car seemed to make rather a noise, Jack thought, but Bill assured him it wouldn't be heard at the castle.
"The only thing that worries me a bit is having Phillip down in that hidden room," said Bill. "If there's a rough house down there, and I rather think there may be, I don't want kids mixed up in it."
"Well, really, Bill, it was us kids who got you mixed up in this adventure," said Jack, most indignantly.
"Yes, I know," said Bill with a laugh, "but it rather cramps our style to have you around just now."
"Bill, what are you going to do?" asked Jack with curiosity.
"I want to find out where that secret door leads to," said Bill. "I think I know, but I want to make sure, and I want to learn a few things without those men at the castle knowing it. It was a pity they spoke in a language Phillip couldn't understand, or he might have learnt what we want to know."
"Well, how are you going to learn it, then?" asked Jack.
"Same way as Phillip might have," said Bill with a laugh. "Put myself and the men into those suits of armour and listen into the conversation."
"Gosh!" said Jack, thrilled. "I never thought of that. Oh, Bill, do you really think you can do that? Can Phillip and I hide too?"
"Well, we'll see," said Bill. "Now, here we are at the landslide, surely."
They were. They all had to get out, and Jack now had to lead the way. He found the narrow rabbit path they'd so often used and led the men along it. They all walked in dead silence, in obedience to an order from Bill, and at last came to the great castle wall. Jack stopped. "Here's the castle wall," he whispered. "How are you going to get into the castle, Bill?"
"Where's that other door you told me of? Not the big front door that overlooks the landslide, the other, smaller door, somewhere in the wall of the castle?" asked Bill.
"I'll take you to it, but I told you it was locked," said Jack. He led Bill and the others round the wall, turned a corner, and came to the door. Bill took out his torch and flashed it quickly up and down the door, coming to a stop at the lock. One of the men came up with a curious thing in his hand, rather like a small can with a thick spout. Jack stared at it, wondering what it was.
"You'll have to get to work on it, Jim," said Bill. "Go ahead. Make as little noise as possible. Stop if I nudge you."
A sizzling noise came from the can, and a jet of strong blue flame shot out from the spout, making Jack jump. The man pointed the spout of flame at the door just above the lock.
"Now to go in,"
said Bill, as he swung the door slowly open. "Everyone ready?" They filed in silently. The last man shut the door and wedged in a bit of wood by the lock to keep it from swinging. "I'll just go and see if Tassie's under my gorse bush," whispered Jack. "We'll have to find out the latest news from her." The men waited in the shadows with Bill, whilst Jack went over to the crag. He climbed up to the gorse bush. A loud voice hailed him.
"Put the kettle on! How many times? Shut up, Kiki!"
whispered Jack in a panic. Tassie crawled out of the bush, full of joy, for she'd been feeling very frightened and lonely. "Oh, Jack, did you come up the awful watery tunnel like I did? Did you get help?" "Yes, Bill Smuggs is here with some of his men," whispered Jack. "You and the other two girls must go down to Spring Cottage. Come on, we must go over to Bill." The moon struggled out as the two went over to the little group of silent men. Bill put a few questions to Tassie, and she answered them shyly. It rather looked as if the men were down in the secret room. Well, they would get a shock when the stone swung back and they saw who were at the top of the steps. "Now listen," said Bill. "You are to work the lever that opens the entrance to the secret room, Jack. As soon as the entrance is open, I and the others will stand at the top and shout down to the men below to come up. We shall have them covered with our revolvers." "Golly," said Jack. "Look out for the girls, Bill. They may be scared stiff." "I can yell to them to keep out of the way," said Bill. "We'll have them up the steps in no time, and you, Tassie, must take them straight away down the hill to Spring Cottage." Quietly, they all moved forward towards the great black hulk of the castle. They stepped silently into the hall. Jack slipped quietly to the back of the hall with one of the men. Tassie showed Bill the entrance to the underground room. He and the others waited there whilst Jack pulled back the spike in the wall. A grating noise was heard, and once again the stone swung back and then sideways. A yawning hole appeared with stone steps leading downwards. The light from the lamp shone upwards. Bill stood at the top of the hole, listening intently. There was no sound at all from below. Jack tiptoed up to him. "Maybe there are only the girls and Phillip there," he whispered. "Perhaps the men have gone off somewhere, down the secret way behind the tapestry." Bill nodded. He sent his voice rumbling down the hole.
"Who's down there? Answer!"
A small voice came back. It was Dinah's. "Only us? Who's that?" "Dinah, it's me and Bill Smuggs," called Jack before Bill could stop him. "Are you alone?" "Yes," came back Dinah's voice, lifted in excitement. "Is Bill there? Oh, good!" Jack ran down the steps and Bill and the others followed, one man being left at the top on guard. Lucy Ann flew to Jack and hugged him tightly, tears pouring down her face.
"No time to waste," said Bill. "Where's Phillip?"
"Oh, Bill, he's gone," said Lucy Ann. "We don't know if the men caught him or if Phillip went off by himself or what. We think maybe he explored that secret way under the tapestry." "Bill, the men are coming back soon," said Dinah, suddenly remembering. "I heard one of them say to another, in English, that they were to have their last meeting here tonight."
"I'm beginning to see daylight," said Bill grimly. "Now look here, Dinah. You and Lucy Ann are to go with Tassie straight away down the hill to Spring Cottage, and you are to stay there till we come. You can go to that side door in the wall, which is now open. The man I've left upstairs will take you there safely and see you out. Then you must go at once."
Dinah, Lucy Ann, and Tassie went obediently up the steps and out of the entrance hole. The man at the top went off to the door in the wall with them and saw them safely out onto the hillside. The girls disappeared into the night. The man returned to his post. The entrance to the secret room was now closed. Below, Bill, Jack, and the others were hurriedly getting into the suits of armour. Bill meant to attend the next meeting of Scarneck with his men, and Jack was glad to see that they all had revolvers. Jack was made to stand in the suit of armour right at the back of the hidden room in case, as Bill said, there was a roughhouse. The boy was shaking with excitement. Kiki was not down in the room. Tassie had carried her firmly up the stone steps, screeching with annoyance at being parted from Jack so soon again. But Blyton, the fox cub, was there. Nobody knew it, of course. The fox cub had curled himself up under the bed where Phillip had hidden, glad to smell the familiar smell of the master he loved. Soon all the suits of armour were standing once more on their pedestals round the curious, museum-like room.
"Now, silence," said Bill. "Not a word from anyone. I think I heard something."
But it was not anyone. It was a peal of thunder so loud that the noise had penetrated even down to the underground room.
"I hope the girls won't be frightened,"
said Bill, thinking of them scurrying down the hillside in the darkness.
"I wonder if it's raining."
"They'll be all right with Tassie, I think," said Jack. There was dead silence once more. Then, suddenly, sounding quite loud, there came the noise of a door being unlocked. Then the tapestry on one wall shook, and someone lifted it up from behind. A man came out from behind the tapestry and folded it back. Jack saw an opening behind, leading into the wall. From it came soft-footed men, one after the other, and with them they brought Phillip. The shaggy-browed man came first. Then the bearded man, the one called Scarneck, dragging Phillip. Phillip was putting on a bold face, but Jack knew he was feeling scared. After him came 3 more men, all ugly fellows with sharp eyes and stern mouths. They came into the room, talking. They left the secret way open. Phillip's hands were bound behind his back so tightly that the rope bit into his skin. Scarneck flung him into a chair. It was soon clear that Phillip had only just been captured. Scarneck rounded on him almost at once.
"How long have you been in the castle? What do you know?"
"I was here with the girls," said Phillip. "I hid under the bed. I wasn't doing any harm. We only came to play about in this old castle. We didn't know it belonged to anyone."
"Get the girls,"
growled Scarneck to the shaggy man. The shaggy-browed man went over to the bed and pulled back the curtain.
"They're not here,"
he said in an astonished voice. Scarneck spoke roughly to Phillip.
"Did you let them out?"
"No," said Phillip, "I didn't. I was hiding here, I tell you, under the bed. I wasn't at the top."
"Well, who let them out then?"
said the shaggy man.
"Now, you tell us everything,"
said Scarneck, and his voice was suddenly ugly and threatening. Phillip said nothing but stared defiantly at the man. Scarneck lost his temper, raised his fist, and gave Phillip such a blow on the side of the head that the boy fell off his chair. He picked himself up.
"Now will you talk?"
said Scarneck, his voice growing with rage. Still Phillip said nothing. Jack felt proud. How brave he was. Then, to his horror, the man took out a revolver and laid it on the table beside him.
"We have ways of making sulky boys talk,"
he said, and his eyes gleamed with rage. What would have happened next if there hadn't been a sudden and surprising interruption, nobody knew. But all at once, like a stone from a catapult, Blyton, who had slunk under a chair on the far side of the room when the men arrived, shot out and threw himself on Phillip. Scarneck caught up his revolver. He lashed out at the cub and sent him rolling to the ground. Blyton bared his small white teeth. "Don't hurt him," said Phillip in alarm. "He's only a cub. He's mine."
"How did he get down here? Then the girls got out, I suppose,"
growled the shaggy man. "I don't know," said Phillip, puzzled. "I tell you, I really don't know how the girls got out, nor how the cub got in. It's as much a mystery to me as to you."
"If this kid is telling the truth, we'd better finish up and get going," said the shaggy man, sounding rather anxious. "Let's settle up our business and go."
A rumble of thunder came down into the secret room again. The men looked at one another uneasily.
"What's that?"
asked the shaggy man.
"Thunder, of course," growled Scarneck. "What's the matter with you? Getting nervy just because a bunch of silly kids are playing around? What they want is a good beating, and I'll see this boy gets it before we go."
Scarneck nodded to one of the others, and he went to the drawer where the documents were kept, unlocked it, and drew out the sheaf of papers there. He put them in front of Scarneck. Then began a long discussion in a language that Phillip did not understand. But Bill understood it. Bill could speak 8 or more different languages, and he listened eagerly to all that was said. Phillip sat listlessly on his chair, his wrists hurting him, and his left ear now twice its size. He wished he was standing safely inside the suit of armour he'd hidden in before. He glanced round at it, and then stared in the utmost amazement. Surely eyes were gleaming behind that visor. He glanced at the next suit of armour, and saw what he imagined were eyes there too, and the next one. He felt terribly scared. Had all these suits of armour come alive all of a sudden? Then he began to think clearly, and it was soon plain to him that it must be friends inside the armour, and not enemies. Bill was listening intently to all that was being said. Papers were spread out on the table, and Bill could not see what they were. They looked like blueprints of some sort, details of machinery, perhaps. Scarneck rolled them up at last. Then he turned to Phillip.
"Well, our job is done. We shall not have the pleasure of seeing you or your friends any more, but before we go we shall teach you what it means to spy on us. Where's that rope?"
"Don't you dare touch me!" cried Phillip, jumping to his feet. Scarneck took the rope. Then, to his unutterable horror, one of the suits of armour walked off its pedestal, held up a stiff and clanking arm, at the end of which shone a wicked-looking revolver, and said,
"The game's up, Scarneck. We've got you all."
The voice sounded hollow. Scarneck and the others stared in the utmost dismay, and then looked round at the other suits of armour, which were also coming alive. It seemed like a bad dream, but a dream that had too many revolvers in it.
"Hands up!"
said Bill's sharp voice. Scarneck began to put his hands up, but suddenly he turned, took hold of the oil lamp, and smashed it on the ground. In a moment the room was pitch dark. Bill gave a cry of rage. Then Jack heard his voice.
"Get under the bed, Jack, and Phillip, quick! There may be shooting!"
The boys did exactly as they were told. They dived for the bed, Jack clanking in his armour. Phillip lay there panting, wishing his hands were not tied. Jack got stuck halfway under the bed. What was happening in the room they didn't know. There were shouts and pantings and groans, but nobody did any shooting. It was too dark to risk that, in case friend shot friend. Suddenly there was a grating noise, and the boys knew the entrance above was being opened. But who was opening it, their side or the other? Phillip had no idea how it was opened from below, though he had often tried to find out, for obviously there must be a way. Then he knew that Scarneck or one of his friends must have opened it as a way of escape, for he heard Bill's voice shouting up to the man he'd left above,
"Tom, look out! Shoot anybody coming up!"
Down below, things were going badly for the 3 men left. One of them was completely knocked out. Another had given in because Bill had sat on top of him so firmly that there wasn't anything else to do. And the 3rd man had tried to escape down the secret way behind the tapestry, but was now being forcibly brought back. Bill at last found a torch and switched it on. The oil lamp was smashed beyond repair. By the light of the powerful torch, Bill had a look round. The man he'd been sitting on was now in the charge of someone else, and was looking extremely sorry for himself. The 2 boys came out from under the bed. Bill had to tug at Jack to set him free. Jack got out of the hot armour as quickly as he could and freed Phillip's hands. Bill's face wore a look of utter disgust. He could see that the 2 men he most wanted to catch, Scarneck and the shaggy-browed man, were gone. He called up to Tom.
"Are you there, Tom?" "Yes, sir,"
came back Tom's voice, rather subdued.
"Have you got the 2 came up the steps?"
shouted Bill.
"No, sir. Sorry to say they bowled me over and got away, sir,"
replied Tom, even more subdued. Bill muttered a few rude names for the unlucky Tom.
"Tie up these fellas,"
said Bill, curtly nodding to their captives. They began to do it very efficiently, and soon the men sat like trussed fowls, sullen and tousled, frowning into space.
"Now we'll have a look at those papers," said Bill. Yes, they've got everything here they wanted to know," he said. "That fellow Scarneck is about the cleverest spy in any country. I bet he felt mad to leave these behind. They're worth a fortune to him." One of the men rolled them up. As he did so, a terrific roll of thunder echoed all around. Everyone looked startled. "Storm's about overhead, I should think," said Bill. "I don't think we'll venture down the hillside ourselves till it's over."
"Aren't you going to see where that secret way leads to?" asked Jack in disappointment.
"Oh, yes," said Bill. "Tom and I'll go whilst the others take the prisoners down the hill, but we'll wait till daylight now, I think."
The thunder was now so noisy and continuous that it was no use talking.
"I'm just going to have a squint out of the front door," said Bill. "It must be a fine sight, this storm."
"We'll come too," said the boys. So up the stone steps they went, and down the hall to the open front door of the castle. They stopped in awe just before they got there. The whole countryside lay cowering under the worst storm they'd ever seen. And the rain! It poured down as if great rivers had been let loose from the sky.
"It's a cloudburst," said Bill. "The sky has opened and let down a deluge. I should think Scarneck and the other fella are having a pretty bad time of it out on the hillside."
"Anyway, the girls had plenty of time to get down to Spring Cottage," said Jack. As Jack was speaking, there came the most tremendous clap of thunder he was ever to hear in his life. Bill suddenly pulled them back a little.
"I think the castle has been struck," he said. "Yes, it has. Look!"
One of the towers, lit up by the next flash, was seen by the two boys to be in the act of falling. Bill hustled the boys back to the steps that led to the hidden room. Down they went, and then paused in awe, for now it seemed as if the castle itself was falling. Hurriedly, Bill pulled at the spike that shut the entrance. With relief he saw the stone slide sideways and upwards, and the entrance was closed. Almost immediately there came a terrific sound of falling stone, crashing onto stone below, and the room shook. "The castle's falling in on top of us!" cried Phillip, and he went pale. Bill thought part of it must have been struck again by lightning and fallen inwards. "You know, I've just realised that I'm awfully hungry," said Phillip suddenly. "I've had nothing to eat since I went off by myself to explore that secret passage."
"Oh, you must be famished," said Bill. "There seems to be a nice pile of tins over there. I think it might while away the time and make us forget this awful storm if we attacked the contents." Jack and Phillip examined the tins. They chose 1 tin of spice meat, 1 tin of tongue, and 2 of peaches. Everyone felt better after the meal. The storm seemed to be dying down. Bill glanced at his watch. 5:30, he said with a yawn.
"I'm dying for a breath of air," said Phillip, whose face was bright scarlet with heat. "How do you open the entrance from down here, Bill?"
"Up there by the ceiling,"
said Bill, and showed Phillip how. There was a hidden lever there. He pulled at it, but it didn't move.
"It won't budge," said Bill, surprised.
Then both Bill and Tom tried together. The stone moved an inch or two, and then stopped. Bill went up the steps as far as he could and tried to peer through the crack.
"I'm afraid part of the castle has fallen in on top of the entrance," he said. "We can't get out."
"We'll have to use the other way, then, the passage I went down yesterday," said Phillip.
"Yes," said Bill. "I only hope that hasn't done any slipping and sliding too. Come on, we'll try our luck this way. I'll go first."
He went into the hole in the wall and pushed at the door there. It opened. Bill went through, shining his torch in front of him. The 2 boys followed. Then came the 3 men with their captives, who were now very subdued indeed. The passage was narrow, but fairly straight at first. After a while, the stone of the tunnel walls turned to solid rock, uneven of surface. The air was surprisingly fresh. Bill thought part of the passage was artificial and part natural. It was plain that it went straight through the top of the hill in a downward direction. And then suddenly they heard the noise of water. They stopped. Bill looked back at Phillip.
"Water," he said. "Did you see any before when you came down here?"
Phillip shook his head. "No," he said. It was all quite dry. They went on, puzzled, and suddenly they saw what made the noise. The deluge of rain soaking down into the hillside was trying to get away somewhere and was running down in a torrent underground. "Goodness," said Jack, peering over Bill's shoulder and seeing the rushing water by the light of his torch. "We can't go down there now."
"It's not very deep,"
said Bill, looking at it.
"I believe we should be able to wade along all right."
He put his foot into it and found that it was about knee-deep. They all waded into the torrent. Splashing through the water, they went on their way again. It was slow going. Jack, who was getting very tired, thought it would never come to an end. All at once, the passage began to slope down very steeply indeed, so steeply that the torrent made quite a waterfall. Bill stopped.
"Well, I don't see how we can get down there," he said. "But wait a minute. I believe there are stone steps leading downwards. Yes, there are. We shall be all right if we don't let the water rush us off our feet."
He went first, very cautiously, feeling for the steps with his feet. The boys followed equally cautiously, Jack almost being rushed off his feet once or twice by the surging fall of water. Suddenly, Bill put his torch out, and daylight appeared in front. The stone steps led out to the opposite side of the castle hill. They were there at last. Bill leapt out of the water and came out of a narrow opening in the hillside, almost completely covered by brambles.
"Well, here we are," he said. "Safe after all."
The boys came out of the hole too, and they all stared at the sight below them. They were on a very steep hillside, with an almost sheer drop beneath. Directly below was what looked like a farmhouse with outbuildings on the slope of the hill. All around the place was barbed wire, row upon row of it. There was a copse of trees behind the house, and in the middle was a clear space. A curious-looking machine stood in the centre of this clearing. It was large and shining. "What is it?" asked Jack, gazing at it in the clear morning sunlight.
"Not even I know that, Jack," said Bill. "It's one of our own country's secrets, something being worked on by our greatest military scientists."
"And that's what Scarneck the spy was after?" asked Phillip.
"That's what he was after," said Bill. "He got wind of it, found out where the tests were being carried out in secret, and discovered, to his delight, that there was an old castle on the other side of the hill for sale."
"Gosh! Did he buy the castle then?" asked Jack. Bill nodded.
"Yes, I made it my business to find out who the owner was. Scarneck had not bought it in his own name. Of course, he was far too clever for that. He bought it in the name of an Englishman called Brown, a man supposed to be interested in old buildings. But I soon found out who was behind Brown."
"Aren't you clever, Bill?" said Jack admiringly.
"No," said Bill. "That kind of thing is easy in my job. I knew Scarneck was probably after this secret of ours, but I couldn't for the life of me see how he could find out anything."
"Well, how did he get the secret then?" said Phillip.
"By wonderful photography, and by making a way right under the wire down to the machine itself, I imagine," said Bill. "Look, do you see signs of digging there? Well, I imagine Scarneck and his friends did a bit of burrowing, like rabbits, right under the wire, and came up safely inside the enclosure."
"Wouldn't anyone see them?" said Jack.
"Not from this side," said Bill. "Nobody would guess anyone would try any tricks from up here. It would seem impossible to get here, it's so steep."
"And nobody knew about the passage in the castle that led right to this side of the hill," said Jack. "How did he find it out?"
"Got old plans of the castle, I expect," said Bill. "The old fellow who had this castle last was quite mad. He made all kinds of hidden rooms with curious contrivances, lived in a romantic world of his own. Scarneck found the hidden room and the secret passage a perfect godsend. It actually came out above the very secret he'd been sent to find out."
"He's a brave man," said Phillip.
"Yes, most spies are brave," said Bill. "But this particular one is a most unpleasant fellow, heartily disliked even in his own country. He'll double-cross anyone, not excepting his dearest friend. Well, I'm afraid he's got away this time, but thank goodness he's left the plans of our secret behind him in that hidden room.
So he can't do any damage, I suppose? Asked Phillip.
Not unless he remembers everything in his head, said Bill. He has a marvellous memory, of course, so maybe he will do us some damage, even now.
I hope he won't, said Phillip. I do so wish we'd caught him, Bill, and old Shaggy too. I didn't like either of them at all. Everyone had been glad of the rest and fresh air, and now Bill got up and looked down the hill. How could they get down without being torn to bits by the barbed wire? Bill saw someone below. He gave a hail, and the man looked up.
"Who are you?"
he yelled.
"Friends,"
shouted back Bill.
"Is Colonel Yarmouth there? I know him and would like to talk to him, but I can't get through this wire."
"Look," said Jack suddenly, and pointed to a beautiful camera standing under a thick bramble. "That's how they got their pictures. I expect that camera you gave me is ruined now, Bill. It was in the gorse bush and had no protection at all. I left it there, unfortunately."
"What a pity," said Bill. "Well, maybe I can arrange for you to have this one instead, as a little return for letting me in on your adventure, Jack."
Another man now came out into the grounds at the back of the farmhouse below.
"Hey, Yarmouth!"
yelled Bill.
"Don't you know me?" "Well, I'm blessed,"
floated up the Colonel's astonished voice.
"I'll send up a couple of men to make a way down for you."
So, in a fairly short time, a way was made for them through the rows of barbed wire, which was promptly repaired again behind them. They went down to the farmhouse, slithering and almost falling down the steep descent. The Colonel and Bill disappeared into the house to talk. The others waited patiently outside. Jack and Phillip lay down on the heather and yawned. After a while, the Colonel and Bill came out and snapped a few orders. 3 of his men took away the captives.
"Well, let's get rid of them," said Bill, pleased. "Now we'll get back to Spring Cottage. I'm afraid we'll have to go down to the bottom of the hill, take the road there, and then make our way up the other side to the cottage. There is apparently no other way to get there."
The boys groaned. They really didn't feel like any more walking. Still, it had to be done. "I suppose the adventure is over," said Phillip. "Quite finished."
"Well, there are a few loose ends to tie up," said Bill. "We must just see if we can find any trace of Scarneck and his friend in any of the districts near at hand."
"We'll have to go and get your car too, won't we?" said Jack, remembering. "We left it at the beginning of the landslide."
"So we did," said Bill. "My word, I hope it hasn't been swept away by that deluge of rain, or buried in another landslide."
"I want to know what's happened to the girls too," said Phillip. "I'm hoping they all got back safely before the storm really started. It seems ages since I've seen them." There was a shriek from the cottage. It was Lucy Ann, of course. She came flying out of the door, her eyes shining, and flew straight at Jack. She almost bowled him over in her joy at seeing him again. "Oh, Jack, you're back! And Phillip, wherever did you get to? We were awfully worried about you." Dinah and Tassie came running out too, exclaiming in pleasure, "Were you all right in the storm? We got so worried about you. Tassie's been up the hill, and she says half the castle has fallen down the hill." "Were you all right in the storm?" asked Jack, as they all went into the little house. "Did you get home before the storm really broke?" "Well, the rain had begun, but no lightning," said Dinah. "Tassie wouldn't let us rest for even a minute on the hill. She kept saying that there would be another landslide, and she was right." "Good old Tassie," said Jack. "She got you back just in time. I simply can't begin to tell you what it was like up in the castle." But he did tell them, of course, and they listened with their eyes wide open in horror. "Where's Kiki?" asked Jack, looking all around. "I thought she'd be here to greet me." "She keeps flying off to look for you," said Tassie. "But she comes back. She won't be long, I'm sure." She wasn't. In about 10 minutes' time, she was back, sailing through the air, shouting loudly to Jack. She flew to his shoulder and pecked his ear lovingly. Phillip put up his hand to his ear, which was still swollen. "Don't you fly onto my shoulder and peck my ear," he said to Kiki. "It's not ready for pecking or nibbling yet." The girls got breakfast for everyone and talked 19 to the dozen. Bill sent his 3 men up the road to find his car.
"And now," said Bill when they'd finished eating, "what about a sleep, boys? I'm tired out."
Jack was almost asleep as it was, and Phillip kept yawning. So the boys went up to sleep on their beds, and Bill put himself on the couch in the kitchen. The girls went out into the garden to talk. They had to put waterproofs down on the grass because it was so wet. The day was lovely now, with not a cloud to be seen. They lazed there chattering, with Kiki joining in now and again. Blyton was asleep on Philip's middle upstairs. "There's someone coming," said Dinah suddenly. "It's Bill's 3 men," said Lucy Ann lazily. The men came into the garden. They looked serious.
"Where's the boss? We want him," said one.
"He's asleep, so don't disturb him yet," said Dinah.
"Sorry, missy, but I'm afraid we must disturb him,"
said the man.
"We got news."
"What news?" asked Lucy Ann. "Have you found the car?"
"Yes,"
said the man.
"but we'll tell our news to the boss, missy."
"Well, he's in the kitchen," said Dinah.
The men moved off to the kitchen. They woke Bill, and the 3 girls heard them telling him something in urgent, serious voices. Bill came out, and the girls looked inquiringly at him.
"What's up, Bill?" asked Dinah. "Have they found your car? And is it smashed up or something?"
"They found my car, all right," said Bill slowly. "And they found something else too."
"What?"
asked the 3 girls together. "Well, apparently Scarneck and his friend went off over the landslide quite safely, and then found my car standing where we left it," said Bill. "They must have got into it and turned it round, and then the deluge struck them, and another landslide began."
"Are they killed?" asked Dinah.
"Well, I imagine so," said Bill. "We don't know. The landslide caught the car and took it along. It dumped it upside down in a gully where these men found it, with Scarneck and the other fellow inside."
"Can't they get them out, then?" asked Dinah.
"The doors are jammed," said Bill. "Have you got a wire tow rope or any good strong rope that won't break? If you have, we'll take it and try and get the car the right way up. Then we may be able to open the roof and get the men out."
Dinah fetched some wire rope from the shed. She gave it to Bill in silence. Bill came back some hours later. The children ran to meet him. Bill was smiling.
"Neither of the men is dead," he said. "Scarneck has concussion and is quite unconscious and rather badly hurt. The other fella has a broken leg and was stunned too, but he's come round."
"So you've captured them both after all," said Phillip. "Well done, Bill." "What about the car?" asked Dinah.
"Well, it looks wrecked to me," said Bill, "but I don't mind that. I reckon I shall be handed out a new car when my chief knows I've got Scarneck and his friend to pass over to him. It's quite a scoop for me, though I'd never have stumbled onto their secret if it hadn't been for you children."
"Well, we'd have been in a pretty pickle if you hadn't turned up," said Jack. "Whatever will Aunt Allie say when she comes back and hears all that has happened since she's been gone?" "She'll say she can't turn her back for a day or two without us all getting into mischief," said Phillip, with a grin. "Oh, Bill, what an adventure," said Dinah. "I never dreamt we'd plunge into all this when we first came here, and it's all happened so quickly. I hope we shall have nice, peaceful holidays for the rest of the time. I've had enough adventures to last me for a year." "I want to stretch my legs," said Jack. "What about walking up the hillside, Bill, and having a look to see what's happened to the castle?"
"Right," said Bill.
And so they all set off up the road to the castle. But they couldn't go nearly as far as usual because the landslide had come a good deal farther down, and the hillside was a terrible jumbled mass of wet rocks, heaps of soil, uprooted trees, and running streams. "It's horrid," said Lucy Ann. Then she turned to gaze at the frowning castle higher up. "The castle looks different. Something's happened to it. 2 of the towers have gone, and most of the walls. The middle part of it has fallen in. It's not much more than a shell now," said Jack, staring. It looked almost a ruin. Phillip stared hard at it. "The middle part must have crashed down into the big hall," he said. "No wonder you couldn't move that entrance stone, Bill. There must be tons of fallen boulders on top of it." Bill looked rather solemn. He could see what a narrow escape from death they'd all had. If they had been anywhere else in the castle or courtyard, they would have been crushed and buried. Being down in the hidden room had saved their lives.
"Goodbye to my camera and all our rugs and things," said Jack.
"I'll replace everything you've lost," promised Bill, who, now that he'd actually captured Scarneck, was ready to promise the whole world to anyone. "And I'll give you all a fine present each for letting me share such a grand adventure."
"Me too,"
said Tassie at once. "You too," said Bill. "What would you like, Tassie?"
3 pairs of shoes, all for myself,"
said Tassie solemnly, and the others laughed. They knew Tassie wouldn't wear them. She would just keep them and love and admire them, but she would never wear them. Tassie didn't need to.
"Let's go back," said Lucy Ann. "I don't want to look at that ruin any more."
"Nor do I," said Dinah. "But somehow I feel as if it's better as a ruin than as a castle owned by a wicked old man or spies like Scarneck. I like it better now. I'm glad to think of those musty old rooms all buried away. They were horrid." Then down the hill they went in the sunshine, leaving behind them the sad, broken old castle, its roof open to the wind and the rain, its proud towers fallen.
"The Castle of Adventure," said Jack.
"You were right, Phillip.
It was the Castle of Adventure."